I'm really excited to be with you today and have another opportunity to speak with you. This is the second in our three-part installment where we're trying to do something pretty bold. We're trying to make the case that the development of chronic disease is somewhat predictable and that there is a framework within which we can think about why our organisms might get sick. And so today we're going to be speaking mostly about the role of environment. And on the clinical side, the role of environmental medicine and how we think about the human body from that perspective. So, as you've already hopefully seen, we have a three-part framework. We're thinking about each individual from the perspective of their biology, their ecology, and their biography. And our purpose in this three-part series is to not only talk about them individually, but also to understand that the sum is greater than individual parts. And what we want to do is understand how each of these things is connected in terms of our health outcomes. Now, we already spent part one talking about the role of lifestyle and lifestyle medicine. That's where we focused on how we move and how we eat and how we sleep. So if you haven't checked in with our first installment, please do. It really builds for our second and third parts of this program. So go back, take a listen. But today, again, we'll be focusing on the ecology. And what we're describing in terms of our biology, ecology, and biography are what we call the core determinants of health. And each core determinant has a couple of core areas. And we've got specialists on our team who focus on each of these. Today, you'll mostly be hearing from Dr. Medeya Tsnobiladze. She's our resident expert in environmental medicine. In fact, she's one of the leading experts in the country on environmental medicine. She sits on the board of directors of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine and actually has chaired their education committee for quite some time. So today we'll be hearing from very much the best of the best. I'm going to spend just a few minutes before I pass it to her talking about why are we here, the context of and our goals for today. I'll set up this idea of ecology with a couple of just things to think about, and then we'll get into the core focus areas around environmental exposures and the shared concept of symbiosis and infectious disease. Why are we here? Why are we here as an organization? Why are we here as an integrative health team? I know our team all came here with one core purpose in mind. We came here because, in our own private practices, we didn't feel like we can change medicine and the direction of medicine like we could at Atria. And our goal here is to change the conversation from what's wrong in the body to why might a person get sick? And Atria is well poised to help lead that revolution so that we can systematize and then teach the world what it will require to think about the body in these two core ways. Feeding into that are six core beliefs for our program. I'll review them very briefly. We're focusing on number three, this idea of the exposome and human vulnerability. And as we'll talk about more than once today, that's not to meant that's not meant to sound scary. It's meant to give proper context to the fact that there are potential environmental attributes that can contribute to chronic disease, but we'll also talk about the body's resilience. And so, first and foremost, we have to consider core belief number one, our innate healing capacity. The body can and will move us in the direction of healing if given the opportunities to do so. And we're all unique, we're all individuals. So we have to talk about this concept of biochemical individuality. That's our genes and our earlier lifestyles and our environments from earlier in life that contribute to how our body might deal with the current state of affairs. And so always we think through this lens of biochemical individuality. And of course, our bodies are not just machines and not just can't be broken down again between their parts. And so we think about this concept of mind-body integration, this idea that our life experiences very much contribute to our biochemistry and physiology. And actually, our biography becomes our biology and our physiology. We also don't do any of this alone. We think about the fact that each of those individual parts are very much connected through the core belief of intraconnectedness, that the human body is a complex adaptive system within which everything is connected. And then as a broader organism, we are interconnected with each other, right? We have to think about the role of community and purpose beyond ourselves when we think about sustainable health and what that should look like for ourselves and also for the planet. So as we talked about last time, we'll talk about this core core question that we ask ourselves and we ask every patient that we work with. Can this person heal in the same environment within which they got sick? Keep that question in mind as we cover all the topics today. Now, this ecology section is pretty broad. We can focus on two parts, the physical environment and then the psychosocial environment. We'll actually be spending a lot of time focusing on the psychosocial environment in part three of our series where we talk about our biography. Today we'll be focused mostly on the physical environment. So again, we'll cover this idea of the exposome, we'll cover symbiosis and symbiosis to its natural conclusion, the process of infectious disease. Now, we're making a very important assertion here. We're making the assertion that environmental exposures are very much capable and in fact are the primary cause of rising rates of man-made diseases. This idea that our bodies are doing the best that they can, but the diseases that are skyrocketing from fertility issues to autoimmune disease to cancer very much have an environmental origin. And our way of thinking about this is that these substances or these exposures are guilty until proven innocent. In fact, it's the only place in the world where that should be the case, right? Until we have proof unequivocally that something is safe for our bodies, we should be very cautious before we introduce it into our ecosystem. And last time in part one, we proposed this sort of framework for chronic disease progression. And we talked about that there's some stressor, some strain on the body. In this case, we're talking about environmental exposure that activates the body's repair mechanisms. And in a perfect world, that moves us in the direction of dynamic homeostasis, and round we go. In a disease progression model, we develop physical symptoms. Those physical symptoms, when they become extreme, or are maladaptive, become an over or under reaction, and that's what leads to chronic disease. And hopefully, medical intervention moves us in the right direction. Our goal with this environmental lecture is to keep us out of the need for environmentally induced medical intervention. That's how we're focusing. This is very much a prevention topic, and this topic is necessary now, and it will be for a long time because you may have heard the saying that we have Stone Age genes in an information age world. Our bodies haven't really evolved to deal with some of the challenges that they're exposed to, right? And the truth is, over time, if evolution has its opportunity, it will deal with that. We are very resilient, and there's a lot of interest in what I would describe as the Stone Age. In the Paleo era, there's paleo diets, and people want to do all kinds of CrossFit to exercise the way our ancestors did. But we're forgetting a core part of it, which is all the things that they were doing, living in small groups, in community, were very important. And also the things that they weren't exposed to are just as important. So until we evolve, and hopefully Atria is around that long to see that through in the right way. But until we evolve to deal with some of these exposures, our best strategy is avoidance. And so I want you to think about your own life. I want you to think about your families. I want you to think about your exposome and think about whether it's possible to be optimally healthy in your current environment, and try to take away some practical recommendations and have some practical takeaways that hopefully starting tonight or tomorrow you can actually begin to think about or incorporate. Now, this topic could be very scary, and that's not our goal, right? You see all these buzzwords flying around. People are asking about plastics and lead and pesticides in the role, and they all, as we're going to present today, play a role. But most important, please remember when you leave here that the human body is quite resilient, and small changes go a long way. If you can make just minor changes, and we'll talk about what some of those might be, from air filtration to water filtration, the opportunity, the effect size is huge in terms of preventing future health outcomes. So please, 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 as you hear some of these statistics, keep that in mind. We have to tell you an accurate story, and it has to be honest. And frankly, our goal is to change behavior to some degree, but please remember that the human body is resilient. I want to just give one example of what I'm thinking about here and what I'm talking about. And I'm going to use the example that was my way into environmental medicine. It was actually in a freshman year undergrad zoology class. Probably the third or fourth week, we had a guest speaker, a researcher on xenoestrogens, estrogen-like substances that kind of float around in the body, most commonly and most famously found in plastics. And this researcher specifically was focused on fertility, and more specifically was focused on male factor fertility. And he told the story about falling sperm rates and quality and concentration and motility, and very much draw a very linear line to the role of xenoestrogen exposures, and that blew my mind. I couldn't believe that some of the conclusions they were coming to were possible. In fact, the conclusions were, we're a few generations out on this trajectory from having a really tough time. And so where are we right now? The World Health Organization proposes that 1 in 6 couples right now experience infertility. And of course, infertility is defined as the inability to get pregnant within 12 months of having unprotected sex. 1 in 6 couples, I think, when I heard that statistic, I was pretty surprised. Again, just the spotlight. Medeya will go, deeper into some of the research on both male factor and female factor and some of the specific contributors, but really large study that reviewed actually 223 studies found that between 1973 and 2018, there was a 51.6% reduction in the concentration of sperm. Just a couple of decades had that much of an impact. And really, what we found is in the 1970s, a lot of these environmental exposures started to be fairly ubiquitous, right? We are always moving in the direction of industry and in the direction of advancement, but we sometimes forget about the impact on the human and the human organism. And that rate is accelerating, right? So since 1972, that rate, 51.6%, was dropping about 1.16% per year. After 2000, that more than doubled to 2.64% per year. So there was an accelerating rate of sperm quality decline. So much so that if we look at one particular feature, which is sperm morphology, which is the percentage of normal sperm in a sample and their ability to penetrate an egg or to have proper motility, it used to be that about 14% morphology was considered normal. 14%, not 80%, 14%, a pretty small percentage. The World Health Organization actually lowered that to 4% in its fifth edition of its guidelines. Now, how are we defining what 14% is? 14% is the lowest fifth percentile of men whose partners actually conceived within that 12-month period. So in just a couple of decades, again, we're accepting as normal something that really should not be normal, and more than a threefold drop. Now, the truth is, these days, a lot of fertility specialists don't even look at morphology because morphology is pretty low in most people. So this is something we have to pay attention to. It's something we have to extrapolate over, decades and generations to understand the full implications. Two very small examples. If we look at air pollution, really large study of over 25,000 men found that more exposure to particulate matter sizes of 2.5 and 10, Medeya will get into that more, and other environmental air quality exposures reduced sperm motility, morphology, overall fertility. Plastics, everyone's hearing about plastics these days. I mentioned the role of xenoestrogens, very clear and linear effect on sperm concentration, motility, overall viability, and just overall rate of abnormal sperm quality. That was a meta-analysis of almost 40 studies that came to that conclusion. So the scope and the scale of what we're talking about here is quite broad. And so as you listen to what Medeya is saying, again, remember these core messages. Remember that the body is resilient and small changes do go a long way. So please try to take away some practical guidance, and we'll come back. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat, and we'll have an opportunity to answer them later. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, Dr. Medeya Tsnobiladze, and I think we're all going to learn a lot from her.
Here we will be focusing on ecology as determinant of health. Ecology is something that comes to mind when a person is asking, why do I get sick? And we're trying to deliver this message that biography and biology are only 2/3 of the answer. Ecology, in fact, is the water in which this fish is swimming. It's the canvas on which biography and biology are painting the picture of state of physiology and how is it in a healthy spot or is it already in a territory that we call a disease? So these are the numbers that show that ecology is not a niche problem. It's something that affects worldwide enormous amount of population and causes 9 millions of premature deaths. Thinking about it, it's more than all the wars and malaria and HIV are causing annually. So on one hand, a huge problem. On the other hand, yes, we need to remember that we are not living in an ideal world. That world was never ideal. There was always imperfection. There were always pollutants, and our body learned how to adapt to it, and we survived as species. We are here. That is a manifestation of our ability to develop adaptive mechanisms. And our goal here is to ensure that body has the time to adapt. And meanwhile, while it's developing those adaptation mechanisms, we are achieving the best quality of life possible. So the and the systemic effect of environmental exposures are not localized. Pollution is not very polite. That once it comes into the body, it doesn't stay in the lungs. It does not stay in your on your skin. It actually starts to affect all of the organs: nervous system, lungs, gut, even reproductive, as Robert Kachko just covered very eloquently. So we have to keep that in mind, and also understand that every cell in the body is dealing with pollutant once the pollutant is inside. So this is a flow chart of what happens. Once the pollution is affecting the cell, we have oxidative stress, we have some DNA damage, we have some protein alteration, and that triggers epigenetic changes, and of course lead to endocrine disruption, inability to detox or overwhelming of the detox pathways, immune system activation. The good news is hidden right here in that schematics, because our adaptive processes are happening right along all of these triggers. Because once we are exposed to oxidative stress, body learns how to make antioxidant enzymes. If the DNA is damaged, repair enzymes are activated and they try to fix the damage, and also body learns how to make that fixing more efficient. So again, we are not trying to convince people to move to the top of the Everest, drink only dew with Himalayan salt, but rather nudge down those risk factors and give the body this place to develop adaptation and live good life as it is available right now. So, who is at most risk? Well, we have 4 categories here, but there are 3 different buckets of the at-risk population. We have young children and elderly, too young and too old. Young because that physiology is still the process in the making. This building did not finish, so it is more susceptible to elements of the environment. Elderly, basically the system is running on limited resources. So yes, they also are more vulnerable. Then there is geographically susceptible. The territory, like if the zip code is between the highway and refinery, that means that mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum and all of those cellular detoxification structures will be running double shifts. And finally, there is genetical susceptibility where certain enzymes like methylation, detoxification are somewhat slower than average. Does not mean that body cannot detoxify, does not mean that that body cannot adapt. It can. It just needs a little bit more support, and that's exactly what we are trying to focus on. How small tweaks, small changes to the risk factors can improve the outcomes, guarantee like higher quality of life. So, exposures can happen everywhere. These are the top 3 that are associated with the most life and health lost. Air pollution, water pollution, and occupational exposures. Good news about it is that if we do something very well within our control with air, water, and our occupational exposures, we are addressing already a huge proportion of those environmental risks. So while, of course, environmental pollution will include something not listed here, and it's impossible to cover all of the toxins and all of the sources and all of the mechanisms in one short lecture, I want to deliver this idea that addressing three main constituents of sources of environmental toxins will make a big difference. And we are starting with air. How do we measure air pollution? Basically, we are addressing the sizes of the particles. Air question is like, why would air be the major source of pollution? And I think the main contributor to that is how often we interact with air. Think about it. We are inhaling like what, 15, 18 times a minute. And if we're eating only 3 times, drinking water maybe 8 times a day, we are making 20,000 breaths per day on average. Every time we are interacting with environment, with the air, and with whatever is in that air. So even tiny concentrations make a difference. But also, interestingly enough, the tinier the particle, the more potential damage it brings. Look at this. These basically, particular matter with the size of 10 microns is impacting the health. Each 10 micrograms per cubic meter increase in concentration increases all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality and respiratory one. But the numbers are more impressive for smaller particles, for the 2.5 micron sizes. And the reason for that is our body adapts to higher size, larger particles by filtrating them in the nose, having the shape of the nose, air going up and then down, stops most of the heavy particles through inertia. They just don't end up in the lungs. The tiny ones get there. And there, our body starts to interact with those particles by residential pulmonary macrophages. And that triggers, some words that you will hear several times during this presentation: oxidative stress, immune system activation, mitochondrial dysfunction. So those the tiniest particles, they may increase mortality by 7 to 8% per each 10 microgram per cubic meter increase of concentration. So the other numbers are like actual, how does it project to population size? We know that particular matter 2.5 exposure is linked to 3.3 millions of premature deaths in 2000, and now over 4 million of deaths in 2018. So we are moving in a wrong direction so far on a population scale. The risk of myocardial infarction, stroke, and cardiovascular death is increasing even with short-term exposures, hours to days. So American Thoracic Society actually established the norms of exposure: no more than 8 micrograms per cubic meter concentration for long-term exposures, and no more than 25 micrograms for short-term. And this limit seems to prevent estimated 14,650 deaths per year only in the United States. What does it mean? It cannot mean, of course, that we should like completely go again to the top of the mountain where there is no particulate matter and no air pollution. But it means that we can and should start implementing clean air policies on a population, on a country scale, but also those clean air policies within our homes. So the air pollution can impact the body, starting from deeply intracellular structures like proteins, organelles, DNA, changing inside of the cell, and that as a result, changing the function of the tissues, the neurons, endothelial, immune system, and then acting on a level of the organs, cardiovascular, lungs, liver, leading to chronic disease and to prevent all this cascade, all this explosion of effects, what we need to do actually is to, oops, I am skipping, the implement clear air initiatives. So it sounds boring, but it is actually projected to save 15 to 20% mortality rate. So decrease the mortality rate by that much, which would have been a huge population success if we implemented those through the conditions that are affecting heart, lungs, nervous system. These are the mechanisms specifically addressing the cardiovascular disease effects. How does it happen? The particulate matter 2.5 microns is able to change blood sugar metabolism, change cholesterol, affect the rhythm of the heart through the neurons that control the heart rate, affect the lead to hemorrhagic and ischemic stroke, alter DNA methylation, and again, all of these scary words can be addressed by filtrating air on a global scale and on the indoor scale. So we have multiple filters available on the market. They all promote different mechanisms. Some of them are based on electrostatic interaction with charged particles. Others are built on a very strong mesh, like a dense mesh with filtration. The range of by how much the particulate matter is decreasing in the air in a home is between 18 and 82%. So it's very highly variable. However, regardless of what is being used, if you are going for the higher projected removal of those particles, we see the drop in blood pressure, in microvascular endothelial dysfunction. We see improvement in how atherosclerotic plaque is formed, like the rate of that is dropping, heart rate variability is improving, lung function is improving, and systemic inflammation drops. So again, back to the statement, we are potentially exposed to some particles that can cause scary consequences, but we have tools to decrease that risk. And our body has the ability to eliminate some of those particles, deal with that, just not too many. While the body is dealing with those particles, it develops mechanisms that will help us with the future exposures, that will help us to adapt to probably still increasing rate of producing those toxins. And as our chemical industry and technology doesn't stay in one place, we are producing more molecules, more unknown molecules, but we are also producing the technology that helps us to eliminate it from the surrounding air. So moving on to water now. Water is essentially us. We are 70% water at least. And interestingly enough, our life, like life on Earth, was created in the ocean, in the water that was a different composition than current ocean. And interestingly enough, our intracellular composition is still carrying that primordial ocean in it. So we are water, we preserve the water composition, we interact with water. Every reaction in our body happens in the water. And water carries good and bad. Water carries all of the nutrients for us, all of the minerals, everything that our body needs to function. But water also can bring pollutants and microbial world that is competing with us for resources of this earth. So water could be bringing pathogen exposure, as we said, and some heavy metals, PFAS, pesticides, plastics, and everything that humans drop in the earth water systems. So water as a determinant of disease is absolutely easy to demonstrate looking into both parasitic or like bacterial effect on the human life and also pollutants. This is probably the place where it's good to remember Flint, Michigan, right? So there, the city decided to change the water source, and the new water source was more corrosive. So knowing that, the systems that would treat that and prevent leaching of the elements from pipes that water was traversing was not really upgraded. So the lead started seeping into that water. On the other hand, we know that sanitation of the drinking water is also very important. And if that's not done, water will carry bacteria. The effect of that could be organ toxicity, carcinogenicity, damage to DNA, could be also endocrine disruption, which we already talked about, that many industrial pollutants will be an endocrine disruptors, and we will cover some of them here. So the impact of clean water initiatives are very, very promising. We see that if the water is cleaned, we expect 17% reduction in all-cause mortality. That's quite a bit, but also 45% reduction in diarrheal mortality. Of course, this affects more countries that are like low to mid impact income. They don't have resources to invest into global immediate shift into perfect sanitation and water treatment. But when we look at the numbers, how much it can save, say, one of the super vulnerable population, children under 5, water filtration and intervention can reduce the diarrheal disease in children by 50%. That's amazing. This would be probably one of the most successful interventions with public health there. So again, population level is one thing. It allows us to estimate the scale of environmental pollution impact on the health. It allows us to see the scale of devastation when environment is not taken care of, or if it is allowed to carry a lot of toxins and disruptive elements. But we have to also remember we have control over our own environment in the house, and water filtration could be done on an individual level. Reverse osmosis is one of the best water filtration available, and the numbers vary. Different systems provide different impact. Same as air filtration, with maybe less variability, but the good water filtration systems promise pretty much 95% removal of everything that is considered detrimental for the human health. And remember that, yes, we should push for public policy, but public policy is not able to cover everything at all times. Individual responsibility is including these, at-home measures that we can take. 95% removal of toxins will improve risk profile for each family that utilizes these measures and help those detoxification pathways work not over time, but normal 9 to 5 job, so to speak, and do the job without being overwhelmed and without allowing the toxins to take devastating effect on the body. So next down will be occupational exposures. And this is basically everything we touch, we bring on our hair and on our clothes from work. We spend at work good chunk of the day. And of course, the exposures of somebody whose work attire is nice suit and the laptop is different from those who have to wear hazmat suit and respirator. And the conversation with each of those individuals will be different. However, everybody has exposure to at least something. Cleaning solutions used in offices, volatile organic compounds, or could be asbestos and silica in construction work, could be diesel exhaust if somebody is a truck driver. So secondhand smoke, all of those are the third most impacting health and public health compounds that affect the health and are determinants of those man-made diseases. Estimate is that workplace exposures are responsible for just under 500,000 cancer deaths annually worldwide. So again, scary, yes, but measures would be vigilant. If you are working in a place where there is a lot of exposure to those asbestos, volatile compounds, and there are PPEs available, personal protective equipment, be extremely boring and pedantic about using them. If there is like exposure to diesel exhaust or like just car exhausts in large cities, yes, take care of the internal air. Use the filters, change when you come home. Have, house clothes. The couple of tables in the next two slides do look a bit scarier than previous ones because they actually list different diagnoses and numbers of people that are estimated to be affected by that, like 180,000 occupational cancer deaths related to asbestos and mineral fiber still per year globally. But we know that the measures and policies that eliminated those particular elements from construction work and insisted on personal protection equipment were able to significantly decrease it. I'm not going to focus on like each individual exposure and the highest risk that it brings. Just this table is just to say and show that some of those compounds have been pretty well researched and caused not only the change in first like lawyers' income with asbestos because the causative effect and causality was firmly established, but also in societal outlook on all of those new materials and approaches in how careful we should be with them. And once we're careful, we can achieve very good results. So these are just two examples of heavy metals and impact of them on the human health. The lead. Going back to Flint, Michigan, lead was leached from the pipes. Lead is very well-known neurotoxin and still can lead to up to 1 million deaths of globally, worldwide, due to the excessive exposure. Lead is a metal that can pretend to be calcium. Calcium is a very important element. It actually works in every biochemical reaction. I would probably not be exaggerating when I say that. It is involved in internal signaling, in clotting, healing, immune system, heart contraction, muscle contraction, brain. So anything that pretends to be calcium but cannot be calcium fully is bound to disrupt those processes in the cause as a result mitochondrial toxicity, neurotoxicity, and all of those results. And we as a society made a huge progress with lead elimination from paint and gasoline, which America actually did before the country I grew up in. So lead in the gasoline was something that I was aware of being a kid. While I believe in that point in the United States, it was already banned. Lead reduction between 1970 and 2000 in America led to basically acted best and better than any, intellect developing apps with some challenging games. It actually allowed the society to gain 4 to 5 points of IQ. Amazing. And without even a single textbook being opened, right? That's because the measurable reduction is, again, possible. Our brains and our technology does not only bring negatives to the world, but also discovers the positives as well. So 50% decline in average blood lead level is something that was measured on the level of the biochemistry, and gaining of intelligence was on a societal. So mercury. Mercury is another one. We actually have a lot of heavy metals, and many of them we are exposed to in different forms on a daily basis. Mercury, arsenic, cadmium, cobalt. Um, Mercury is, I probably picked mercury because I remember myself playing with a thermometer. I would break it, let the mercury out, and play with it on my hand because it was so much fun. At that point, I did not know that it can also pretend to be calcium. It can mimic the calcium activity, interrupt mitochondrial function, modify proteins, specifically the ones that are like sulfur-based proteins that are very important in our immune system and in our pretty much like building of all of the enzymatic system in the body. So it also causes excessive oxidative stress and neuroinflammation, nephrotoxicity, you name it. And mercury was eliminated from the population by actually not even using those mercury-based thermometers. We are also giving advice to people to basically be mindful of the sources of mercury that are coming from food. Pregnant women are advised not to overeat sea fish. The choices of fish can be very successfully modulating the mercury intake, and that drops the cardiovascular risk and also leads to improvement in IQ. I want to make a pause here and also go back to, is it also scary? When I was researching the mercury impact on the population, and especially maternal exposure to mercury on the fetal impact, I found several studies where in which some exposure to mercury was actually positively associated with the birth outcomes, better birth weight, better development of the infant. That is not because mercury is so good for you. The message here is, first of all, association is not causality, but also there is no fear. Shouldn't be just fear and complete Puritan approach, like we need to completely eliminate exposure to mercury. Our body handles small exposures really well. But the food sources that carry mercury, such as fish, also have absolutely amazing set of nutrients that pregnant women and their babies, fetuses can utilize very well. So small exposures to mercury did not overwhelm the benefits of the fish that carried that mercury and did not overwhelm the ability of the body to detox it, and led actually to better birth outcomes compared to people who were not consuming the same level of beneficial nutrients, but also less mercury. So this particular study here that says that there is up to 7-point loss of the IQ in the mothers who had high level of mercury, that was comparing the mothers who were having exuberant amount of fish consumed, much higher levels than what we are seeing in United States. Basically, on average, women in United States do not have that much mercury exposure. And while it is a cautionary tale of not to overconsume heavy metals. It also is a very encouraging tale of the fact that, yeah, even the metal that can make so much devastation in the body can be detoxed. And I kind of flatter myself with thinking that, yeah, I didn't come out too bad playing with mercury half of my childhood, essentially. Body detoxed it as well. So the next category of the toxins belong to endocrine disruptors. Those are like, if we have to compare what the endocrine disruptors are, they're like uninvited guests in our body who do not observe, boundaries of our receptors. They come and keep knocking on those doors and entering the cells, and they do have an ability to impact health because it's interacting with the receptor that causes intracellular changes. Some of them are normal changes that were just happening when they should have not, because the signal didn't come from the internal mechanisms of the body. It came from the exogenous exposure to something that just by happenstance can pretend that, being estrogen or being thyroid hormone, etc. So dominant health outcomes for those three leading endocrine disruptors like PFAS, PCBs, and phthalates are risk in thyroid disease, dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, and diabetes, cardiovascular, obesity, etc. So everything that is normally regulated by healthy endocrine feedback mechanisms could be disrupted by molecules that body does not expect to be there in such high amounts. Again, body can very well handle small amounts of those interactions with the receptors, but not too much. And exposure reduction initiatives can actually be very, very successful, like removing PFAS from water, reverse osmosis, filtration, and reduce the levels in the blood by 60% over several years. So that's a pretty significant reduction and substantial decrease of the pressure on the body's self-regulation and detoxification channels. The PCB bands correlate with steep reduction in serum PCB levels over 30 years, 80% decline. So again, our body and our physiology is a self-cleaning mechanism, and so is the phthalate regulation that led to annual trend of decrease in level of exposure. So we are, again, having the tools to deal with those. And all we want to do with this presentation is to bring awareness to the fact that molecules that disrupt physiology exist. We can deal with them in small amounts, and the goal is manage the exposures, eliminate everything that you can, and support detoxification and physiology where you can. Just live your life. So the endocrine disrupting chemicals monetary impact on the society is quite staggering. It's just interesting sometimes to read the number out loud. $340 billion is the burden of all of the diseases that those endocrine disrupting chemicals are bringing on. And it was in 2016, it was determined in 2016, with ongoing measures to decrease those organic compounds, endocrine disruptor exposures. We hope to achieve substantial improvement in the outcomes. Again, the question is how much we will be doing that. The pesticides and herbicides are another elements that are almost unavoidable at this point. They save the crops, they are being used. Agriculture is not eliminating 100% of them anytime soon. So what do we do about that? They have mitochondrial dysfunction ability, they cause oxidative stress and DNA damage. Well, eat organic whenever you can. Voting with the dollar works. The industry can shift in that direction. but also wash the produce very well. Be aware of dirty dozen, which herbs and which produce carries the most of the impact of pesticides and herbicides, and which are actually relatively safe to consume. And that basically could reduce the risk of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, reproductive disorders, and respiratory disorders. We do know that there are 300,000 deaths worldwide from acute poisoning alone. So this one should not be overlooked, but also it's not, it's the call to action rather the call to panic. We wanted to specifically spotlight Parkinson disease and trichloroethylene. So it's like TCE, chlorinated solvent. It is something that we should keep as an example of, oh, now we know better. It's a solvent, lipophilic, very efficient, but it can cross blood-brain barrier. It is widespread in air and soil, and now can penetrate pretty much any tissue of the body. It was found in human breast milk. It is very persistent. And as our esteemed colleague, Dr. Ray Dorsey, researched extensively, it does connect with dose-dependent increase the risk of Parkinson disease. So most studies estimate the risk increase at 40% of greater. It can cause neuroinflammation, mitochondrial damage, alpha-synuclein change of conformation that leads to its aggregation, and basically tracks with pathophysiology of Parkinson disease. So we got to remove that. Plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics. We live in a plastic world. I am doing this presentation in front of plastic-covered microphone, and each phone has the plastic. And even if we ban all of them, straws and plastic bags in grocery shops, the plastic is everywhere in our life. We essentially turned our world into this smoothie filled with microplastics and nanoplastics, and the trend is only in the wrong direction, basically towards the increase. There is a knowledge gap. We really do not have a full extent of what plastics do in our body. We just know that it's now found everywhere. Like microplastic and nanoplastic particles can be found in every tissue. And what does it fully mean? The extent of its impact on health is still to be researched. But estimates are that we have 4.5 increase in cardiovascular disease risk because of that, with the highest exposure to plastics. Production process alone causes 158,000 premature deaths, and it costs global economy 1.5 trillions annually to deal with the health impact of those molecules. So to be continued, we should work on that. We are now researching the bacteria that can consume plastic and clean the world from the plastic that we no longer are using. So hopefully we will develop technologies that reduce the burden on the world of the plastic, but we need to be mindful in our day-to-day life as individuals to reduce the use of plastic as much as possible. All right. This is fertility study review associated with xenoestrogens, endocrine disruptors, to make a full circle where Dr. Kachko started. We know that we have reduction in fertility, and main causes of infertility are broken down roughly 40% male, 40% female, 20% unknown. And these are the systematic reviews of how exactly the persistent organic pollutants affect the fertility. Basically the fecundability is the time to get pregnant. we see very high level of evidence that PCBs decrease it. We see in the French cohort, pelagic cohort in France, that PCBs also decrease that. So it's not specific to just one country. Swedish cohort confirmed the same. The LIFE study, which was a very long study of 501 couples, also correlated exposure to POPs and decrease in fecundability. Male factors, the same. Chinese study of male fertility showed that PCBs and elevation in plasma led to semen concentration drop. In Russia, they actually did the organochloride chloride study exposure for prepubertal men and tracked them for up to 15 years. And they discovered that the higher exposure led to less volume of ejaculate and decreased sperm concentration. So again, same LIFE study showed impact not only on the female fertility, but on the male as well. And the conclusion is, without a doubt, those organic pollutants can bring us to the really big struggle with having families and children. Xenoestrogens are ubiquitous, and I wanted this picture of birth control, which made a revolution in everything, in economy, in a workforce distribution, in societal interaction. But they are, of course, only one component, but they are contributing to estrogens landing in our soils, in our wastewaters, and pretty much involving the entire world. So just be mindful about that presence. And again, going back to water filtration, we want to make sure it's happening. Our case study was IBS. IBS can be connected to environmental toxicity from air to water to heavy metals. We know that the zip codes where particulate matter 2.5 exposure was higher than normal, each one microgram increased the risk of IBS incidence. So again, if you look at the individual number, it's small. Over the course of population, it leads to many people being affected. Now, I want to switch to the dangers of the world to what is us. We have symbiotes and infectious diseases being caused by bacteria. First of all, we are more than us. Our cells are minority in the community that human body is. We carry 10 to the 14th power of microbial cells in the gut, on the skin, and in the mouth, everywhere. Our gut microbiome is affected by our life biography, from birth to meds intake, to diet, to life environment, to stress levels. But our gut microbiome is absolutely essential in helping us metabolizing our medication and waste and toxic exposures, regulating our nervous system by making neurotransmitters, regulating the immune system. And our microbiome is, I call it sometimes, our army for hire. We pay them with shelter and nutrients. They protect us from intruders, and they do it pretty well. The gut microbiome gives us some vitamins, produces a lot of serotonin and GABA and dopamine. So serotonin, the good mood neurotransmitter that everybody's talking about, the short chain fatty acids, which are protective and also in turn feed our colonocytes, our intestinal cells. The multiple types of studies showed substantial correlation between the gut microbiome and longevity and health. Mendelian randomization studies showed that presence of good bacteria correlates with longevity. Presence of bad bacteria may negatively affect the longevity, and certain bacteria abundance predicted the longevity really well. Now, comparative studies in extreme longevity showed that centenarians have different flora from other elderly adults. They have more abundance of like Akkermansia, for example. And also the high proportion, not just individual species, but certain symbiotic taxa. The longitudinal studies confirmed the same. Aging is associated with decreased microbial biodiversity, and those who did live long maintained that biodiversity longer. What it exactly means is that we need to treat that microbiome as part of our ecology, internal ecology with which we interact. It's almost our additional organ. It's like not quite humans, but the toolbox that can help repair and feed and protect our entire organism. Skin microbiome is also producing quite a bit of the important functions. We maintain skin microbiome protects us from UV light, facilitates healing, maintains proper pH, and overall is supporting the health of the entire body through that. Oral microbiome has couple of unique functions as well, one of which is it metabolizes dietary nitrates and produce NO, which regulates blood pressure. So there is a direct correlation between skin and oral microbiome with systemic conditions. These are just the example. Eczema, atopic dermatitis, the most common skin condition, is associated with microbial change in the gut and on the skin itself. And oral microbiome, we know that up to 50% of adults worldwide are affected by the periodontal disease or proliferation of chronic overproliferation of bacteria that is not so beneficial for us. And that one is associated with substantial increase in heart disease and coronary syndromes. Now, we're not going to focus on infections. This is pretty much our last, slide talking about microbiome and ecology that may add to the burden of health maintenance through stealing our resources and giving us only trouble through chronic inflammation and immune dysregulation and cellular impact, intracellular impact. But that is actually a subject of like 3-hour-long separate lecture. All I want to mention here is a few top bacterial chronic infections having public health burden, viral and parasitic. We know H. pylori leads to nutrient malabsorption. We know that staph infections, chronic staph infections can cause sleep dysregulation, lung conditions. And we also, being in Northeast here, cannot not mention tick-borne diseases such as Borrelia and Bartonella and Babesia in a parasitic infection category. So those at some point probably will be covered at some other time, but bringing it back full circle, we are swimming in infectious world and we are prevailing. So let's find methods to do it best and to manage risks, eliminate everything we can, support our body, and live our lives.
And just to bring a quick example back, we had talked about IBS when we were talking about lifestyle medicine. The microbiome, no surprise, directly connects with IBS. So if we have too much of a certain bacteria, we're likely to produce certain kinds of IBS. If we have insufficient amounts, we produce others. There's a strong connection between serotonin production in the gut and motility and the progression of IBS-C in particular. All of that, of course, we have to consider for each individual patient. So that is our conversation on ecology. And like I said earlier, the key here, the primary focus is how are all these things connected? Medeya said it beautifully. Without the role of ecology, we can't really consider topic one, our innate biology, and topic three, our life experiences. We have to really see the big picture, and that is our vision and our goal with everyone we work with. So thank you so much for listening. I think we've got time for just a couple of questions. So let's see what came in today. Maybe we'll do about three questions. So number one here on my list, let's see. Do we know if diseases like endometriosis and PCOS were described before the Industrial Revolution when many of these endocrine disruptors became widespread? That's a great question. So a couple of landmarks in time come together. Like the Industrial Revolution, I think of the mid 1700s. I think a lot of these chemicals came around. The phrase that comes to mind is better living through chemistry, right? That was DuPont's slogan sometime around World War II in the 1930s. And I think that had some implications for us. Now, PCOS, I actually think, funny enough, was described around the same time. Back then was called Stein-Leventhal syndrome. And uh, we know a lot more about PCOS now than we did then, but really it was primary focus on polycystic ovaries, on amenorrhea and infertility, and then hyperandrogenism. That hyperandrogenism in particular and infertility certainly susceptible to endocrine disrupting chemicals. Endometriosis is interesting. I think sometime in like the mid 1800s, there is data that endometrial tissue was described uh, through biopsy in ovaries and other tissues. So it was around, but we were naming these diseases shortly after that, I guess, chemical revolution as opposed to the industrial revolution. So I, I can't say for sure, but I'm sure if we plotted the paths over time, we would say that there's something to it. So that's a great question, and I ask that question to myself every time I think about the progression of a disease and, like the fertility example we gave, what's changing over time? And we can name a lot of complex chronic illnesses in that very same way. So I appreciate that question. Second question came in, how should someone who's not in one of the most vulnerable groups, so we talked about the young, the elderly, those who are genetically susceptible, those who live near highways, as Medeya said, think about their risk for environmental exposure? It's a great question. So, like we said, the body is resilient, and the key focus is avoid what you can. If your trade is driving a truck and we were talking about diesel exhaust and things like that, maybe you can't avoid that, but you can certainly make changes even if you're young and healthy to avoid other causes of air pollution and drink clean water and things like that. So truthfully, if we take the viewpoint that all of these things are guilty until proven innocent, we will really recommend that everyone avoids everything they can. So even if you're not um, listening to this as a young child, even if you're not what we would consider elderly, or if you don't live in a socioeconomic area that is more disproportionately impacted, pay attention to these things. The example we gave with plastics is there's a knowledge gap. We don't actually know the full breadth and depth of how these things are impacting us. So that conversation around who's most susceptible was meant to really frame what it is in our biology that makes us more susceptible, right? It was a focus on have our immune systems developed the right way in children? Are we beyond the point where we can mount the right response as we get older? Genetically, there was some conversation around detoxification and CYPs. There's strong, strong variability between our ability to detoxify certain exposures. And so the more precision we can bring to that, the better the conversation is. But we have a species response to a lot of these things. So we certainly need to practice safe avoidance as much as possible, right? And also live our lives because we're resilient. We're going to keep driving that message home. And the third question here was, given how ubiquitous the toxicants are, from air pollution to PFAS to microplastics, what are two or three high impact environmental changes people can start with if they're feeling overwhelmed? That's a great question. I think a wonderful way to close this conversation. I can tell you what I do in my life. Um, and I'm probably in Medeya and I are in the 99th percentile of people who care about this stuff, right? And here's what I do. I focus on air filtration. I make sure that We don't use, unnecessary solvents and cleaning agents, and we do just fine. Ask my wife; she keeps the house very clean, and I do too. I contribute, I promise. But we really focus on not overdoing it with toxic solvents. Um, and then we filter our air. There's really interesting data that the average air quality inside a home is actually 2 times more toxic than air quality outside of a home. And we presented some data on outdoor air quality. So we've got really high quality air filters, and certainly happy to share offline what some of our favorites are. And of course, they have to be designed for particular systems and homes. So that's number one. Number two is we filter our water. We've got a whole house system that filters for things like baths and brushing teeth in the whole house, and showers. And then we've got a point of use system, a reverse osmosis system, which is what we presented on earlier, that really gets rid of almost everything. So much so that you have to remineralize the water. So if you don't have a house where you can put a whole house system in, at least get a reverse osmosis system. They've gotten much more affordable these days compared to where they were before. So that's number two. And if I had to give a third, I think the idea that we are what we eat resonates very much in my mind. And so choose organic foods whenever possible, right? Eat foods within their evolutionary context. That can mean eating, if we're going to eat beef, eat a cow that's been grass-fed and had a good life and was hopefully raised on organic farms, and then eat organic whenever possible. So the amount of pesticides and the proportion of pesticides and the impact for foods that are highly sprayed versus not so highly sprayed are huge. And if we're talking about this idea of not overwhelming ourselves, there's something called the Dirty Dozen in the Clean 15. So Environmental Working Group every year puts out a list of the 12 most commonly sprayed foods. Really choose organic there. If you're wanting to save money or don't want to overwhelm yourself, just focus on those 12 foods. And so those kinds of conversations we have with every member that we work with to make sure that not only are we giving broad advice, but we're really trying to fit it into the context of their lives so that behavioral change is possible. Certainly our goal is not to scare anyone here. So thank you so much for listening, for paying attention, and please join us for part three of this series, where we'll be talking all about our biography, our life experiences, the impact that has, bringing it full circle on our biology. So thank you so much.